Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, July 17th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So guys, the Jeffrey Epstein story just does not want to die. Even with the Attorney General off touring Alcatraz, the administration continues to be dogged by questions. And then we have this new poll from Reuters that shows that only 17% of Americans are satisfied with the way Trump has handled the Epstein files. So, Tom, what is the story? Why does the story continue to have such a purchase on the media and, for that matter, on the national imagination?
Well, because it was one of the things that Trump talked about during the campaign and has been an ongoing thing. And remember, I mean, Trump was one of the reasons that Trump was elected was to sort of drain the swamp and, unmask the elites as, on all of these issues. He was going to release the files on JFK and MLK, which he did. And Jeffrey Epstein was part of that. And suddenly he's put the brakes on that. Now, apparently, earlier today, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was asked about this in the briefing room, said the president doesn't feel like there needs to be a special prosecutor. That was one of the things, one of the options that people were suggesting was available to him to sort of, course correct and get the ship back on track. If they had, an independent special prosecutor who would look at this and produce a report, that might satisfy a lot of folks in his base that are upset. Instead, he just has gone full bore, calling his supporters who have criticized him on this, some very prominent supporters, weaklings and dupes of the Democrats. This is Obama's hoax, and they're falling for it again. And so he's really put a stake in the ground on this, and it has upset his supporters. You mentioned that poll, 17%. I mean, it was 35% among Republicans. So you got about a third who think he's handling it fine and 2/3 who aren't. Now, and the other twist to the story is like Democrats are suddenly all in. They want, they see this, they see what this is doing, how this is dividing the MAGA base, and they are, 100% invested in making that continue and twisting the knife as far as they can. So they're suddenly wanting, trying to get Congress to take votes on this, and they want a special prosecutor. They want as much attention given to this as they can moving forward. And, Trump's trying to use that as an example of why Republicans should just, basically shut up and move on. But there are plenty of them who are out there who are not willing to shut up and move on. And that's why this continues to be an issue. And I think will be for some time.
Yeah. So, Carl, is it, how much energy comes from both the sort of the mainstream media now is all over this story, of course, and the Democrats sort of latching onto this as an issue?
Well, as Tom pointed out, they sense a winning issue here. I don't know that it's a winning issue. I don't know that it's even a real scandal. But you ask a poll, it's not criticizing the pollster or the survey, how it was drawn up, but we're so polarized now in this country. The two political parties, they'd much rather just accuse each other of criminality than govern. That it's almost a push poll. Do you approve of what Trump's doing on X? Every Democrat will say no. So right. You're starting with 40% of the populace already thinks he's at fault and should, just check himself into the nearest federal prison. Then you have this minority, but of MAGA supporters. But as Tom's pointed out, they're influential. They're some of the most visible people, including Kash Patel and Don Bongino, who are running the FBI. These are the exact same people, not people like them. These people who made this a huge issue for so long and spun these wild conspiracy theories. And now they're saying, oh, yeah, let's move on. So there's people in the MAGA base who believed them the first time, don't believe them this time. So it's a mess. But a poll like that conducted at this time, when, as you and Tom both point out, the mainstream media can't get enough of it. I don't even think it's a real scandal, but they love it. It probably gets good ratings. It gins people up.
We're talking about it.
Makes Trump look bad. You two have forced me at gunpoint to talk about it for the third straight day.
What would it take, Tom, for this to quiet down? Is there anything that the administration could do?
I don't know. Wait. Before Tom answers that, remember what Clinton did? He bombed Bosnia. So there's always things the president can do to change the subject from a sex scandal.
I want to ask about the sending his attorney general to Alcatraz in a second, but Tom, what could be done?
Well, he's tried to change the subject, but it hasn't worked very well. And I mean, special prosecutor was one option that was available. Another one was, to have a press conference and just answer questions, release as much information as humanly possible. There's stuff out there that, things that maybe could be redacted additionally to give a little more info. But that's just to say, look, we're not releasing anything else and you got to trust us. And this is an Obama hoax and you're falling for it. That does not seem to be working. So I think they have to do something, but I'm not sure what it is. And the problem is they're now on the side, as Carl mentioned, you've got when you portray this thing as it's a scandal and it's a deep state thing and swamp and they're covering up for this pedophile and he was doing all these things with all these sort of elites. When it's portrayed like that for years and years and years, and suddenly now you're in power and you have promised to expose it, and now you won't expose it, you become part of the deep state and part of the conspiracy right? Even if what might have happened, as Carl mentioned, they got into power and they're looking at the files and suddenly they're like, oh, well, honestly, it wasn't that big of a conspiracy and it wasn't as bad as we made it out to be when we were outside of the government. And now that we're in the government, we can't, you can't walk it back. You cannot put that genie back in the bottle. And so they're kind of stuck.
Yeah. Well, it did seem that one attempt to sort of move the story forward move another story forward was to send the attorney general back to Alcatraz or to Alcatraz. That was something we hadn't heard about.
Wait, you keep saying that. Do you mean Alcatraz or do you mean Florida?
No, Alcatraz.
The real Alcatraz.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're back on that.
So she's out there today, or was out there today, touring, looking at it at the president's request to see about turning it back into a prison. So that story,
that's the singularly most stupid idea Donald Trump has ever come up with. And if you think about it, that takes in a lot of territory. This prison from, abandoned in the, after 50, 70, 80 years ago, doesn't have the island has no water on it. You'd have to, let's just start with that. It cost you millions of dollars a year just to bring in water.
I know.
It'd have to be rebuilt. It now generates $60 million in revenue for tourists. She should have refused that order. She should have said, Mr. President, I'm going to save you from yourself. I'm not going to Alcatraz.
I don't think she's in a position to say no to the president right now, Tom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we talked about this when Trump first had the idea, and Carl was sour on it for obvious reasons.
I was slightly more diplomatic then.
You were. But look, I think this is Trump trying to, again, change the subject a little bit. And they did come up with, Alligator Alcatraz. And so I guess the idea is to have one on each coast where they can use as a facility for their mass deportation program. But I don't think this is ultimately going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, Carl, the other thing, they fired Maureen Comey, daughter of the former FBI chief. She was a prosecutor involved with the Maxwell case. Does that just feed the conspiracy at this point?
It might, but my guess as to what happened, and I don't have inside knowledge, is that they just noticed she was still on the payroll, and somebody said, "Wait a minute, Jim Comey's daughter works for us. Fire her now." My guess is it didn't get much further than that. I don't think they fired her because of any of the work she did, which, if you think about it, is not very complimentary to these people. They're firing people for reasons like that. We've talked about this since like January about all these people they fired and all these agencies. They didn't know who they were or what they did. Well, they know who she was, and when they found out who her daddy was, she was gone. I don't think that's a legitimate reason to fire somebody, but you can see how of all of the second generation Democrats in this administration, who are in the public service, who are public servants, they'd want to get rid of. You can kind of understand it.
Tom, do you think it feeds the conspiracy?
Sure. And we talked about nepotism yesterday. Clearly, Well, she was involved in the original prosecution of Epstein. She was involved in the Maxwell case. She was involved in the Diddy case. And so I think maybe she once that concluded, they felt like they had the leeway to fire her. But yeah, I think this does. If you look at some of the stuff online, like there's people don't believe this is any sort of coincidence, and that. But again, maybe she'll come forward and talk about what she is able to talk about and what she knows and shed some light on this. I don't think she's going to do that and do Trump any favors,
right,
or the Trump administration any favors, given the antagonism between him and her father. So, but yeah, I think it certainly adds to the flavor, if you will, of this whole mess that's going on.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We're going to be back right after this. Tom, the Senate passed this rescission bill, claws back about $9 billion that the House had appropriated. It includes federal funding for public broadcasting. This has been a goal of Republicans since at least the Nixon administration. It looks like Trump is finally the Republican to get this done. What do you make of it? Are you crying over the loss of Big Bird and all that?
Well,
stuff?
Given how Elmo is talking these days, no, I have no problem. No, look, I'd be a little more favorably inclined if NPR and PBS were actually sort of objective in their coverage, but they're not, and they haven't been for a long time. They've been massively left wing in how they've presented the news. So I have no problem stripping their funding. I mean, David Harsanyi, who writes for the Washington Examiner, he posted on X earlier, and NPR shows average around 26 million listeners and over 1,000 stations across the country. Its podcast gets 17 million users. The idea that taxpayers need to pay for any of it is absurd. And I completely agree with that. So I think, if liberals want to fund NPR, that's fine. I saw Bernie Sanders post something on this too, saying, we need to have public broadcasting. Bernie Sanders would not be paying, would not advocate paying tax dollar money if NPR and PBS were as right wing as they are now left wing. He'd be wanting to strip that money away, I'm sure. And so, unless he's advocating that we have a new sort of alternative that gets taxpayer dollars, that is the right-wing alternative to NPR and PBS, that's something. But I just don't think taxpayer dollars should be spent on this at all. And so I think this is a promise made, promise kept, and probably a good one.
Well, I never root for journalists to be out of work. You know this, Andy. I'm consistent on that, whether they work for the New York Times, which has attacked us twice for no reason at all, or Voice of America, which I think did the Lord's work, or NPR. And I don't disagree with anything Tom said about that to me, the priorities of that network, I think they got off the rails some years ago. But hiring as their new CEO recently, last year, Catherine Maher, I think actually I think that cinched the deal.
I think you're right, Carl.
When she was at Wikipedia, she gave TED Talks in which she described the First Amendment basically as an inconvenience, and factual based reporting as undesirable because it got in the way of an agenda, presumably a woke and very, very progressive agenda. Well, should the taxpayers pay for that? I think she made it easy for them.
Yeah. The weird thing about this is that none of this is going to make NPR or PBS go away. I mean, the federal funds were a small portion of their overall budget, and the things that will be cut or will not necessarily be the news organization itself. And NPR has been going through shrinkage for years. That shrinkage may continue. I'm sure it is every one of these things bloated, and you could cut 10, 15% of the people and not even notice any difference. That's probably what's going to happen. I don't think their editorial is going to change. If anything, the one downside of this that I'm not sure conservatives have thought through is that once you get rid of any sort of congressional oversight, even a fig leaf of that, you've sort of, Katie bar the door. I mean, there'll be no controls at all on what NPR and PBS decide to broadcast at this point.
Who cares?
Well, exactly. Well, I'll tell you why they care. Because they do get a federal subsidy that is not reflected in the budget, and that's the licenses they hold to still what's considered valuable airwaves. So they are getting they have a special perch. They'll retain that special perch, and they'll be able to continue doing this.
I love the argument.
Thinks they'll get even more left wing, Tom.
Yeah, I do think they'll get more.
It's not even possible. Number one, but number two, if they do, who cares? I love the argument that they were saying, NPR and PBS, they're a lifeline for rural communities.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I'm like, do you really think like the farmers in rural communities are listening to All Things Considered on their tractors and like in their F-150s heading into town? I mean, give me a break. Come on.
They've all got satellite radio. They're listening to XM, right?
That's what they're listening to us, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right. That's the other thing. And that's where this conversation sort of, again, goes off the rails, where the two sides are talking past one another. I mean, for the Democrats to be making that argument, that this is somehow a lifeline to rural America, it just doesn't pass
I'm
the smell
sure,
test.
and we just talked yesterday about how much money there is in politics. I'm sure Democrats and, Catherine Maher will be able to go to a bunch of heavy hitting Democratic donors and say, listen, we need you guys to pony up to fill the hole that we just got and they'll be fine. As you said, they're not going away but at least they're off the taxpayer dole. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So the final point I'll make on this is just how much state money goes to public broadcasting as well, which is, there's about 20 of the states, the PBS stations in Maryland is an example, South Carolina is another example, where the state pours all this money to it. There's no shortage of money in public broadcasting. I spent part of my youth working in and around. I never worked for public broadcasting. I was always an independent producer producing for public broadcasting, which is actually the way most of the television programming is made. It's made Ken Burns works for himself. And does very well. The NewsHour for a long time was owned by the two principals who started it. So there's a lot of sort of public-private partnership that goes on in public broadcasting, and maybe there'll be more of that in the future. But there's a lot of money that's spent.
I can't believe that South Carolina would still be charging their taxpayers and giving money to public radio and public broadcasting.
I will check.
I can understand Maryland, I can understand Illinois, but some of these red states, if they haven't cut off that supply yet, they probably will after this.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to see, because they might. I want to talk about just this one other poll that caught our eye, and that's this AP poll that says that most Americans don't think the Trump administration is actually helping them. Only 25% say it's been good for them. Carl, I was sort of surprised at those numbers. Maybe I shouldn't be, but what did you make that poll? Plus, I will say he's also slipping on some of those issues that were really good for him, like immigration. He's sort of down on immigration as well. Well,
look, there's been a barrage of anti-Trump news coverage, as there was the first time he ran, and some of that, it's going to take its toll. As I said earlier, I mean, any question you ask about Trump, do you approve of Donald Trump curing cancer? No, I don't, because certain people are just going to say no to any question with Trump. But there is some. If you're a Republican, if you're a member of this administration, there's some worrisome data in there, Andy, and it's. My guess is it comes from the tariffs. It comes from, people, these tax cuts that people have talked about, they haven't gotten them yet. So maybe that'll be when these tax cuts kick in, despite what the Democrats say, most of the people, by far, the largest percentage of Americans receiving tax cuts are working class people, middle class people. I'm going to talk to Eric Spitz about that in the next segment. But but I think people are worried about these tariffs, and they keep hearing that things, are going to get worse, and they're worried.
And they haven't.
And they haven't yet, except that inflation's starting to creep up. The inflation number in June was 2.7% year over year. It's the highest since February. It's starting to creep up. People. I think some of the people who voted for Trump actually thought, grocery prices would go down. Now, gasoline prices have declined, but grocery prices haven't. So I think there's still some anxiety about the economy among people, and so they're being cautious. Trump is not cautious in giving himself credit. He's very liberal in that, small L liberal, in giving himself credit. I think most voters are they're waiting, and they haven't made up their mind, but they're a little worried. That's the sense I
Tom,
get.
we got about a minute. Are those 25%? Are they wrong? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's 82% of Democrats. I mean, 55% of Republicans say that Trump's policies have helped them, but only 28 or so percent, 53% of independents think Trump's policies haven't helped them yet. And those are the ones you want to focus on, particularly as you head into the midterms. Do independents feel like Trump's policies have helped them in a material way? And I think that the jury's still out on that. I mean, they just passed the bill. This was why Republicans were, adamant about getting this done by July, the 4th of July, because they want to give this, some of these policies are going to take some time to ramp up and get, sort of into the political bloodstream here, so that people can, by the end of this year, beginning of next year, hopefully be feeling some of the effects that Republicans hope they will feel on this. And this is the other reason that Donald Trump is nonstop every single day bashing the crap out of Jerome Powell, trying to get him to lower rates, because he feels like that's another place where, there can be some political goodwill derived from lower rates, which have been mortgage rates have been kind of sticky, certainly, and credit card rates as well. So we'll see. I mean, I looked at this poll and I thought, I mean, I wouldn't be too worried if you were a member of the administration right now. It's early in the game.
All right, good. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Tom Bevin, Carl Cannon, I'm Andrew Walworth. You're listening to Real Clear Politics. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Richard Porter. He's a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Richard, good to have you back on.
Good to be here, Tom. Thanks.
So I wanted to have you on. You've obviously been a lawyer for a number of decades, and there was this story in the Federalist, which was this exclusive. They got their hands on this memo that was written by Judge Boasberg, one of these guys, a district court judge who's been in the news a lot because he's issued a number of injunctions against the president and his executive orders. And this memo that the Federalist got their hands on said that during the annual meeting that these judges have, right, is Chief Justice John Roberts and the chief judge of all the different districts and some of the regional courts. They meet in D.C. This was during the week of March 11th of this year, so just not too long ago, that he had written a memo and they had discussions about Donald Trump and his concern that, this is Judge Boasberg talking, his concern that Trump would disregard rulings of the federal courts, leading to a constitutional crisis. And so, Richard, I guess the question for you is I don't know enough about this to have a well-formed opinion. How big of a deal is this? Is this as big of a deal as the Federalist is making it out to be? How unusual is this for a district court judge to put something like that in writing, not just because he's the president of the United States, but also because he's a defendant now in many, many cases that have been brought through our judicial system. So, I mean, how much did this surprise you or shock you, and how big of a deal is it?
It's a big deal, but it's not shocking. It's a little surprising that someone wrote it up. I think actually what happened was it was a conversation that occurred that was then summarized in a memo. But what's really extraordinary about it is it's a window into the challenge that the Trump administration has dealing with 600 district judges around the country. We elect one president, and there's the idea is we have one president, the unitary executive theory. The idea is that president alone has control of the executive branch. But Trump's activism, his vigor, his energy, and he's brought to office, which is in such contrast to the president that just came before him, has gotten a number of people who should know better so spun up that they are doing things that they should know is wrong. I mean, there's no way you should be discussing with a higher court a litigant in cases that are before your court at that time. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. One of the basic principles that even I know as a corporate lawyer is that you don't have ex parte conversations about a case. So trying to
learn that like the first day in law school, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you're basically, you can see Boasberg, he's trying to prepare the justices with his perspective. He's almost doing a little oral argument himself over this breakfast about the bad behavior of these litigants in front of him. One of them, he's basically saying they're going to violate the law. When the reality is that these judges themselves are violating the law, not just in terms of talking to the higher court about this, but in the way they're approaching the job. We have branches we always talk about as separate but equal, and nowhere does it say the branches are actually equal, but it's clear that they're separate. And the Constitution purposefully divides power among the branches. The executive has the power to execute on the laws, and it's the judge's role not to be superior to that. They're not the ultimate executive. We don't have judicial supremacy. They are equal to, or actually in the Federalist Papers, they talk about them as being the weakest of the three branches, being legislative, executive, and judicial. It's their job to reason about the law and persuade about what the right answer is. But their power over the executive is relatively limited because, again, they are on a par. So the power they ultimately have is with reason. And we are respectful of each other's power. And the president, although he's not happy about it, has been respectful even of judges that have gone too far. And so there's no case in which, Boasberg should have been talking about this. But on top of that, his fear was unfounded. It turns out he was the one that was acting extra legally, not Trump. So it's really sort of an interesting window into the complex way people are thinking about this thing, because people are doing things they really shouldn't be doing.
And part of the reason, Richard, and this is sort of the larger discussion when you step back and look at this, is the politicization of the judiciary, right? And we have seen that over time. I mean, I've been doing this 25 years. You've been, in this longer than I have, in terms of watching the court and Congress and how important everyone talked about the judicial appointments being. But it seems like judges aren't necessarily leaning liberal or leaning conservative. They're almost more, part of the blue team, part of the red team. And certainly with Trump involved, there has been this almost urge among partisans, including now folks who are embedded in the judiciary, to resist whatever it is he does. So how do we undo that? How do we depoliticize the judiciary? Is that even possible at this point? Or is this just an ongoing process that I don't even know where it ends, but probably ultimately in some sort of constitutional crisis? But is there any way to unwind this system that we've got going?
Well, recognize that the judges themselves are chosen on a political basis. So almost all these judges are chosen because of political connections they have. So some are chosen because they're great academics. I had the opportunity to work with one of those judges. But by and large, what you find in the judiciary are smart lawyers that have political connections. And so the degree of their political activism will vary, but they're all going to have a political background, more or less. That's just part of the system. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what is important is that when a judge puts on the robes, what ideology do they adopt? The idea of the rule of law is an important ideology. The idea is that law is above all who are governing, including the judges, and that the judge's job is to put aside biases in terms of judging the case in front of him with the two parties, but also with regard to the law, to review the law dispassionately with the objective of implementing the will of the people as expressed through Congress and the executive branch. It's not necessarily to be creative. Now, the problem, I don't know where it ends, Tom, but where it starts with an ideology over the last 50 years that's taken hold in our law schools, the idea of critical legal studies. And I wrote an article about this with RealClearPolitics earlier last year. The problem is that there is this ideology on the left, which is that law is always inherently political, and that therefore the judge should don the political interests that they have and be self-justified in the exercise of their political will. It argues for the politicization of the judiciary. So when you have judges from the two parties, a lot of the judges coming in from the left have an ideology that politics is good in law. On the right, there's still a conservative view, which is that the rule of law is something independent of a partisan viewpoint, and the objective is to be outside of yourself, outside of your own will, and instead adopt the will of the people as expressed in the law. So you have a rule of law ideology on the right, which Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts, these other folks that on the Supreme Court majority still wholly adopts and is trying to still promulgate. And on the left, you have people who are more self-consciously adopting political viewpoints because that's the ideology that they learned in law school. the ultimate answer, I think, is we have to get back to the rule of law, where judges believe in law too, and judges recognize that they have a very limited and very humble role in this process, and that's just to be honest about what the law actually says.
You kind of almost led me to my next question, which was on the Supreme Court in the case of Ketanji Brown Jackson. She has now found
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, she's now found herself on, dissenting in 7-2 cases, 8-1 cases. And she actually gave an interview the other day where she said she was proud of the fact that she had this platform to espouse her opinions. And she is written in a couple of these dissents, arguing almost outside of the law, irrespective of precedent, and just sort of arguing her political opinion, and even to the point where, again, Sotomayor, for example, who's a progressive judge and certainly someone on the left, has I wouldn't say rebuked her, but sort of tried to friendly remind her that some of her arguments are just not quite out of bounds, but certainly off the mark. So we now have this at the Supreme Court, and so again, it's like I don't know how we deal with this and where this ends up leading us, but when Trump is off the scene, when he's gone, is there going to be a reversion to, will some of this stuff subside, or is this the new normal? And it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or JD Vance or Marco Rubio or any Republican from this point forward, that this is where we're headed.
What Trump is really good at, he's good at getting people to reveal who they really are. And I think that that's what we see with Justice Ketanji Brown. Because once you reject the rule of law as an ideology, and your viewpoint is that being a judge creates a platform for you to express your opinions, what you've done is you've moved away from a situation where there's a dispassionate review of what the law is, and instead the judge is saying, I am the manifestation of the law. I am the law. Just the way Fauci said, I am science. You have Ketanji Brown saying, I am law. And this has a kind of idea of judicial supremacy, of rule by judges. Now, some cultures, like in Iran, they have mullahs, which are essentially judges announcing the law. And this is a completely different, to shift away from the neutral ideology that the country was founded upon. So what's happening is that this Trump's activism is getting judges to reveal who they really are. And it's really up to the people to recognize that that is a bad system, where turning power over to unelected judges to declare and use their judgeship as a platform to declare what law is, instead of working through a representative process to determine what the law is going to be. The end result is the people have to choose the best people to govern them, and the people who govern them have to have a perspective on the country and on their opponents that is still part of the American tradition, which believes in the rule of law, believes in the role of the representative government, and everybody should be humble in that process and play in their own lane. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, Trump, with his bold activism, is causing some people to show just how many people in the system on the left view their role as being somewhat dictatorial in nature themselves.
We're already over time, but two quick questions. So
Yeah.
so does this mean we should think about and consider term limits, or should judges have to face election?
No, I think the election of judges, information about the judges is very difficult to obtain. I think it's better to leave it with the current system. I don't think we ought to change the con, but I just think in terms of the people we elect, the representatives, the senators, the president, they have to believe in America. They have to believe in the rule of law. And this is the problem we have. There's a lot of nonsense about democracy is at risk. And the people that are saying that are threatening democracy themselves. That's what's really profound about this. And you can see it in that memo.
We've got to leave it there. Richard Porter, former RNC committeeman from Illinois, contributor to RealClearPolitics. Richard, always great to have you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. We are going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You listen to us on SiriusXM Radio. Joined now in this segment by Eric Spitz, frequent contributor to Real Clear Politics and former owner of the Orange County Register. It's when I first met Eric in my California newspapering days. It was probably my last hurrah on a California newspaper. Eric was for the Register, writing a weekly column.
Fun.
Yeah. You got an interesting piece. I won't call it a column. It's really kind of an analytical analysis of the budget that we ran today on the front page, and it seems like these obscene deficits that have left this country $36 trillion in debt are now a permanent feature of the landscape. And this bill, what did Trump call it? The big beautiful bill, his tax and spend, the Republicans' tax and spend measure, kind of locks us in, doesn't it?
It does in both directions, which was something that sort of dawned on me as I was reading through the ramifications. You heard a lot of people with a lot of different analyses, and the analysis that jumped out at me was that you're shrinking both sides of an equation. The one side of the equation is the availability of using the capital, and you're shrinking that by locking in things like Medicare, Medicaid, and defense spending, and all these things that just make it so that that missing piece, which is your debt service, which is growing, keeps taking up more and more of the available pie until there's none left.
Let's talk about the debt service because this is so obvious, and sometimes the obvious things don't occur to us. Why, as Donald Trump declared war on Jerome Powell. Now, this president gets, he takes things personally, and God knows he's been the victim. I mean, he's taken more than he's given out. I mean, I don't blame him. I'm not being critical right now, but he takes things personally. But this seemed to come out of nowhere. Jay Powell is kind of generally well liked, thought to be competent, but Trump's gone on a jihad against him for not cutting interest rates. And your piece explains why.
Yeah, it also explains or suggests that Trump is not alone. Every single president in history has wanted the rates cut because once you have debt service, and once your debt service is as large as ours, one rate point cut, 100 basis points, is worth $300 billion a year.
That's just servicing. That's the interest on the federal debt. So 300 billion. So let's put that in perspective. That's more than the Department of Education. I'm not talking about the employees. Now I'm talking about all the money the feds spend on education, plus the National Park Service, plus probably the Weather Service put together. That's what 300 billion gets you. It's a lot of money. So Trump's, if the interest rate was cut, this deficit wouldn't look so bad. And you're right. All presidents have complained about this, but we've never had deficits like this a sustained period. So the last year of the Trump administration, all 4 years of the Biden administration, a couple of years in Obama's administration, and now again this year, we've got these debts, between $1 and $2 trillion. It's crazy during peacetime, and it would be less with the lower rates. But as you point out, we'd still have a mess on our hands, wouldn't we?
Indeed, we would. And that's where you get to the other side of the equation, which I only read a couple times, but it stood out to me, which is that when you double the size of the standard deduction, you take the number of people who don't qualify to pay taxes from 60% of our economy to up near 70. That means that you are concentrating the main payments on fewer and fewer people, knowing that the top 1% is contributing 25%. But then everybody from that point down to the 30% left from the 70 is left to carry the rest of the economic tax burden.
Not only is that quite a load to carry, I'm reminded, Eric, you remember Mitt Romney got in trouble for this. He said, something like 47% of the people will vote for the Democrats because they're on the dole. Jerry Ford, so you go back to Ford in the 1970s, and he noticed this, and he talked about it in a more, he wasn't at a fundraiser, and he knew he was president, but he talked about this in a way that everybody should be paying in, that this idea of shared sacrifice, if you have too large of people who just don't pay taxes, they're not invested the way other people are. They see government, as a benefit instead of an obligation. That's problematic from a civics point of view. You sound like you agree with that point of view.
I do 100%. I think it is the primary danger that Donald Trump stepped in front of when he went all towards the regular people. Right now, he in his first attempt, he doubles or he increases by 10% the number of people who don't pay taxes. How is that a Republican ideal? Let's throw that back.
Well, yeah, it's always been Republicanism to object to that and to say that it's not good economics. It's not even good civics, as I point out. The other thing I'll say, Eric, is that taking entitlements off the table. The Democrats scream bloody murder about these Medicaid cuts, but taking the other entitlements, the really big ones, Social Security, Medicare, as Trump has done, Biden did, everybody does. So if you're starting there, if you talk about, look, we need an army. So let's just not count defense spending. You go through this in your piece. Let's put that aside for a moment. Let's put aside the entitlements for a moment. We have to pay the interest on the debt, which we've been talking about. So you're left with this gargantuan federal budget, and the discretionary spending that has Elon Musk and people so up in arms is like less than 10% of the budget, more closer to 5%.
Correct.
So what does that tell you?
That doesn't leave a lot of room for negotiation, that's for sure. And that's really the problem. The only way you get to a negotiated outcome is through growth. You have to grow the pie. And that is literally the only way out of this.
Well, and the other thing is you could have responsible politicians who would level with the American people and say, hey, we're in a time where we need shared sacrifices. Maybe we need all these Medicaid cuts, and maybe we need to not have these taxes cuts, and we're still way behind the eight ball. We all have to roll up our sleeves and and do our part. Maybe that's part of the solution too. You hint at that at the end of your piece.
Indeed, yet the beginning of the piece casts a lot of doubt on whether that's possible anymore, given the way that this big, beautiful bill really solidified some of the things, put them into law, like the taxes, right? That was going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth when the Dems had it, when the Republicans had it, if he just left it as a sunset issue, but he didn't. So now he's moved the goalposts, and now we're negotiating from the point where this is a permanent issue.
All right, I want to throw out an idea to you. It's my idea. I haven't written it yet. I'm going to write a piece on this. You really inspired me with your essay. I was going back to the last time we had a meaningful attempt to control entitlements, and that's 1983, the Greenspan Commission. Ronald Reagan, signed off on it. The House Tip O'Neill signed off on it. Well, how did that happen? How did you get these two parties, which are not as polarized as the parties now, but they were pretty polarized, to agree? Well, they both felt vulnerable, but they also had some strength. So Reagan was a very popular president. The Democrats knew that, but the House was solidly Democrats, and Reagan had just lost. The Republicans just lost 26 seats in the midterm elections. What I'm throwing out there, long wind up, but I ask you to comment on it. If you care about the deficit, and this is counterintuitive, what you're rooting for, I submit to you, is for Hakeem Jeffries to be the next Speaker of the House, for the Democrats to take back the House. So each party will have some sense of its own power. You'll have Trump in office. You'll have the Senate Republican, presumably. But each party will also feel vulnerable, and that's what it takes. That's the environment necessary to get a compromise where each side has to give a little and is willing to give a little.
I think there's no doubt that we are in a compromise moment. The question is whether that's enough for the Democrats to get in office, because my sense of what they're going to do first is try to kick out Trump again. And
we've seen that movie.
A lot of time. I know, but
were they trying to get him to have a third term? Come on. I think maybe Hakeem. Well, we'll find out. Look, I mean, sure. Mike Johnson's been a pleasant surprise to people as a statesman. I'm not forget policy. I have high hopes for Hakeem Jeffries. Maybe he would rise to the occasion and do help do the kind of compromise that we had in the 80s. That was a fix that lasted a generation. We need another one. But as far as laws go, something that works for 25 years on fiscal policy is pretty good, isn't it?
It's fantastic. And if that is one of the outcomes of this big, beautiful bill, it will definitely go down as a resounding success. As say what you want about the chaos he's starting to get stuff done.
All right. Well, I encourage you all to look at Eric's piece. It's got a nice kicker. I won't give it away. You're listening to Eric Spitz, contributor to Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief. You're listening to us on Sirius XM or maybe watching on our podcast on our site. And join us again tomorrow, Friday, same time, 3 p.m. in California, where Eric and I are from, and 6 p.m. here in the East.